Kreimer!
That was good.
Just want to find out which one's
Yeah.
cool. There we go.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for coming. As Chris said, we've known each other a long time. Can everybody hear me in the back before I... Yeah? Okay. No? Was there a no? Okay. If there is anything, I tend to just, I've found that these talks, having taught for a long time, this is I think my 10th or 11th year of teaching, I've been, as a student, as a teacher, I've sat through a lot of artist talks, and I find that when they're written, I tend to fall asleep as an audience member. So I decided I prefer to speak off the cuff, as it were. So sometimes I preface this is sort of a preface to say that I will often digress, but I think I'm sort of trying to match the talk to the way the studio practice actually works. I'm going to start with images from the latest show, which closed a few weeks ago in Brooklyn. It was called Coming and Going. And then I'm going to go back to some work in college. We're going to speed through time through kind of sort of works. I feel like as somebody who's working as an artist, speaking to art students, when I was a student, it was really helpful to see what people did before their work kind of figured itself out. And so I'm going to show you some images on the path to the work kind of becoming more individual. So, long preface for this is a painting. This is my favorite painting in the recent show, and I showed a mix of abstraction and figuration, or I call it figuration. I'm going to use the words figuration, observational painting, realism. I use them loosely. It basically just means I paint from direct observation. There's usually not figures in them, so forgive me for the wrong terms, but I've just sort of, out of habit, because I don't want to constantly say observational painting, which sounds a little bit, it's a little bit clunky, a phrase. So this is an abstract painting from the fall of last year, and its title is Pictures on Fridges. And this was actually a really exciting painting for me to make. I've been starting to work more with, I've always worked with layered images, but I've been working more with trying to make erasing a bigger part of the painting process. So this is actually I'll tell you how I made this. This is two paintings. It's two layers, basically. The under layer, which I painted probably 3 years ago, and I was using leftover paint from another painting that I just had. And I often do that where if I have paint left over at the end of the day, I keep extra canvases around, either half started or blank canvases. And I'll take the paint that I've mixed and worked through the course of the day that's dirty and whatever, and I'll sometimes just like try something out on a canvas and leave it, or I'll partially squeegee it off, which is what you're seeing in the light blue and green. A couple years, and I let it just sort of sit there, and then a couple years later, I was walking at night through the city, and it was very misty through Manhattan, and there was this kind of beautiful, that weird purple. I don't know if you get it here because I haven't been here on a misty night yet. I suppose it'll be misty tonight. But that sort of purple haze that cities get at night, and there's these little windows in buildings. And so I had this very vivid experience of this kind of color memory of walking through the city at night. It wasn't anything specific so much as a color memory. And so I just sort of painted that loosely, squeegeed it partially off, and then wiped away the rest. So there's no tape or contact paper. I just paint the whole second surface and then erase a lot of it. And I kind of I was sort of happy with this painting because a lot of what I'm looking for in the paintings has to do with sort of subconscious or semi-conscious references that you sort of feel more than you necessarily get verbally. And this reminded me a lot of sort of there was something weird about mid-century Italian design. There's a table at the Brooklyn Museum that's this crazy abstract, I don't know what it's called, Chris would know the name for it, where they do the stone carving to fit all the tiles into each other. And it's this really ridiculously sort of delicate, simple, almost childlike design, but it's extremely elegant. And I think it's from post-war post-Second World War Italy. I think it's from 1950. And so there is a certain kind of feeling of slightly awkward elegance that I was really attracted to. And you see it also in films. I'm thinking of Antonioni or something, where you have purposely sort of like elegant awkwardness in a situation. And so that was something I was kind of interested in, that I think I found, rather, I wasn't looking for it, but when it sort of appeared in the wiping away, I was excited to sort of make this little line. Let's see if I can get a cursor on here. That little line right there, make it really sort of barely there, but just there enough that it sort of suggests something. This was the painting. It was actually hung. That other painting was hung. Pictures on fridges. That previous painting was hung over this painting, which was painted, I think, in 2010. And it's a painting, as you can see, of layers of space. And this is something that, you know, Chris was saying, my plein air experience. My work has gone back and forth, basically since I started as an undergrad painting, sort of seriously, it's gone back and forth between observational plein air painting and abstraction. Although for most of the 2 years in grad school and the 5 years preceding, I pretty much just did observational painting. And this was kind of coming after that abstraction had come back into the work, but I was bringing in a more abstract kind of tendency. And so I did a whole series of paintings where I would often try to focus as much on what was right in front of me as the thing that you're supposed to be looking at. So this is kind of an interesting scene in that there's a lower highway. It's a merging of 2 or 3 different highways into an expressway. And so there was this first layer of highway, and then there's sort of a screen of trees, and then there's a second highway underneath, and then there's another landscape behind that that's sort of a hill that comes back, and of course there's the foreground of the fence. And I was interested in the fact that when we're looking at things, we're constantly ignoring tons of stuff. And in fact, we have to, or we would go crazy if we didn't. And so my plein air paintings, my observational paintings, are very much about experiencing the things that we're sort of train ourselves not to experience, the things that we train ourselves not to notice. This is another painting from the show. This was painted this summer. This painting is called Shiitakes. And I was staying at a friend's farm and painting in their barn for a couple weeks. And I came down one morning to go do another abstract drawing in the barn, and they were harvesting shiitakes. They have a little shiitake. It's not even like it's a shiitake, I don't know what you'd call it. Like, it's a bunch of logs that basically get rotten, and shiitakes grow on them, and they sell them at the farmer's market. And they were drying the shiitakes from the rain. And I came down, and it was like, oh my God, there was this amazing abstract painting sitting on the kitchen table. So I asked them if I could paint in their dining room, living room thing. And so I was looking at this image today when I was sort of refreshing, kind of reviewing the slides for the talk. And I remembered that I'd put in this little detail here. And the thing that I got really excited about this painting was the bookshelf, and in particular, that little corner where the angle's there. And I was really excited about that because that little bit of light, I think the thing as an observational painter, I walked very quickly through the painting one class, and it was really nice to see a lot of those paintings. There was a beautiful painting, well, it was sort of half done, but of the wire ball that, I don't know your name, whoever it is who did it, but the trick with painting things from observation, for me, is very much about finding that little moment that makes it sort of hits some trigger that we know, that we recognize what that is. And so the little corner that is that little decorative sort of, where's the little decorative, almost like Victorian corner, for me was a real signal to the whole room. It opened up the whole room, and you realize this is an old-fashioned bookshelf painted white. It has this, because of the way the light hits it, you sort of experience that it's not gloss paint, but it's slightly matte paint, and the light's coming in at a certain sort of morning angle, as well as the shadows on the shiitakes. So I was very interested in finding these little details that tell a bigger story about what's going on. And this is a painting. This was sort of inspired loosely by. Did anybody see the movie Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy? Yeah? Nobody? Okay. I don't know. Oh, yeah, there's some hands. All right. So if you saw that movie, you may remember a scene where the head spy, who's played by Gary Oldman, who's, a Caucasian, is swimming in this gray-brown, this English guy is swimming in this gray-brown pond in Hampstead Heath in London. And this is sort of late middle-age English sort of pink head bobbing through the gray-brown muck. And it's this amazing scene where these English men of business who are clearly these big shot dudes are swimming in this pond through the muck, and you see their breath rising. And so I was very much taken with this sort of really bizarre English color experience of pink heads bobbing in gray muck. And I think I was sort of thinking about but I sort of reversed it where I used this really thick brush to paint these big strokes that sort of are really wide, and they became the heads bobbing through this pink muck in a weird way. And here's just to give you a sense of scale. These paintings are all pretty moderate in scale. And that's something that I've actually, not everything I make is that size. But scale and size is important. And I think partly one of the things one of the games I like to play with a viewer, and also with our expectations of what art should be, is just as the paintings are about scenes that we often overlook, I'm also interested in sizes or scales that are sort of they're so banal as to be overlooked, and then how do you make that interesting again? So it's kind of, there is a kind of perverse pleasure in denying the viewers anything that they're expecting to like or expecting to be interested in, and then finding them, hoping they'll somehow be interested in it through some magical, art thing that happens. This is a painting called Field, and it's of a field, and this is painted. You can see that if you took away everything above the horizon line, it would basically be an abstract painting. So the two have really merged into each other. This is a painting that was the sort of lead image on the postcard that was called Please Stop Talking About Your Divorce, which was actually, I got in a little trouble. I can tell you, you guys probably, okay, if I tell you this, I hope it doesn't leave the room, okay? I'm going to tell you guys a little secret, which is that there was a friend, and we were sitting at a bar, and he kind of was a jerk ever since he got married to his wife and his kid, and he was getting a divorce. To nobody of his friends' surprise, he was getting a divorce. He really asked for it, and so I'm sitting there with a bar, and of course, being a friend, I don't really know what am I supposed to even though it was his fault and he was kind of a jerk, all right, I'll go sit in a bar with him and hear him cry and whatever, and all that. So we're sitting in a bar, and it's he keeps, and so as he's going through a divorce, he drinks too much. So we go to this bar, and every few weeks he calls me, and I feel oh, okay, I'll drag myself to a bar, and I have a young kid, so I don't have a ton of time to go out hanging out and listening to this guy drink about his woes of this divorce he brought himself. So I had this very vivid, again, it was sort of a color memory of being in the bar with the kind of weird, the shadows in bars that you see people through their profiles, and then the red lights that are kind of behind people, of the jukebox, the exit sign, that sort of thing, the bar lights. And so I got back to the studio the next day, and I just had this very vivid impression of talking to this guy about his divorce, and all the emotions that brought up for me about marriage and kids, and kind of blowing stuff in your life in this huge way, and I kind of had to exercise it in this sort of painting, which became a little I don't know, there's something a little bit satanic in this painting of just get onto the painting, and maybe just the color scheme. But so then another mutual friend of ours sent me an email when I sent out the email to the show, and he was like, dude, I can't believe you named your painting that. I can't believe you sent your email to every single friend of ours that says, please stop telling me about your divorce. And so I was like, oh crap. So I emailed him, and I said, dude, because he had said dude. So I said, dude. I don't ordinarily start my emails with dude. But this kind of felt appropriate. So I said, dude, my parents just got separated a couple years ago, which is true. They were married for 50 years and they got separated. And I can't believe you think this is about Anthony, or that he would be so arrogant as to think it's about him, when this parent separation was such a bigger deal for me, and I can't believe it. And I was like, and that's why it's called that. I was really talking to my parents. And he was like, yeah, whatevs, or something like that. And then, of course, but I was like, dude, that's it. That's the story. And I was holding to it, and I was like, all our friends, I was like, yeah, my parents, it really was horrible, and whatever. But So this is, it actually is about my friend, and so I didn't want to embarrass him in front of everybody. But so this is a painting called "They Have Their Own Precinct," and again, you can see how the sort of red, you know, the thing about this painting and a lot of these landscapes, it's like I sort of paint a landscape and then I get to the thing that's closest to me, and then I sort of have to paint over the entire thing with a bunch of new brush strokes, and that's what the red reeds are, these kind of anarchic, like invasive weeds that have taken over this area, and the brush strokes kind of represent that. And the title comes from the fact that when I was painting this painting outside, when you paint outside a lot, weird stuff just tends to happen, because I imagine if you do anything outside a lot, weird stuff tends to happen. So, but painting outside, people just feel like compelled. So there was this guy who was walking around looking really scary, not scary, but just he was off, okay? And his pants were way too high, like they were coming up mid-calf, and his socks were pulled up, and perhaps most tellingly, he had like a ski mask on. So that was like pretty scary. And this was in Prospect Park, which is kind of like Brooklyn's version of Central Park. And he's wandering around, and you know, I'm painting quietly, and I have like palette knives, which aren't really that defensive. But if anybody attacks me, I could like, I don't know, scrape paint off them or something. So I don't really worry about my safety that much. But so then this woman comes around, and she's like, "Did you see that weird guy?" And she says, "You know, he was touching himself in front of me. I was jogging or I was stretching, and I was like, no, I didn't see that. I did see that guy. Actually, it looked weird. I didn't, you know, he didn't do it to me, but he." So then the cops drive up, and this is like the highest point in the park. It's like this weird little like secluded spot, which I chose precisely so I wouldn't be distracted. The cops drive up in a van, and they can do that because there's this little paved area, and they come up to me, and it was really hot, but I was wearing my like hiking shoes, which I used to paint outside, and so I take them off. I was standing on them in my bare feet, so my feet could breathe, and they're like, "Sir, you know, come to the van." And so they're like Brooklyn cops. They're not, you know, they don't want any guff. And so I go up, and I was like, "Do you mind driving like 5 feet more so I don't have to put on my shoes?" They're like, "We could arrest you for not wearing shoes." I'm like, "Dude, I'm trying to help with this serial masturbator guy." So anyway, long story short, they were just like real jerks. And it turns out, and I was like, you know, yeah, I saw this guy about an hour ago. And then they were sort of half accusing me of being the guy. I mean, it was just it was like insane. And but anyway, so it turns out that the cops in Prospect Park, it's its own precinct, and it's a very poorly policed precinct, it turns out. But so the title is "They Have Their Own Precinct." And this is a painting, and this is actually a painting. This is obviously an abstract painting. And this is a painting that I actually was kind of, for me, an important painting. It wasn't like a breakthrough painting or anything, but it was just important because a lot of what I've been thinking about in the studio is how do I got really angry one day when my daughter was really little and she was in danger, and I got super angry. But it wasn't like a male macho anger. It was like I became like a really angry mom. It's a lot scarier. And so I was like, oh my God. And I actually like reached this place in me where I was like, holy crap, inside of me. And do you guys know, some of you may know like Tibetan Hindu gods and stuff. So Kali, you may be familiar with Kali, is the Hindu name for it, and in Tibetan stuff it's Mahankala, I think. And you've all seen pictures. It's that blue demon, and she's standing with like a necklace of men's heads and whatever. And I'm happy I'm in California because I can't say this story on the East Coast, but this is totally, you guys, this is good. I'm happy I'm here. So I realized when I was angry, I didn't realize it, but my friend who lives in Oakland was like, oh, and I actually saw that I was this blue demon. I didn't know the name for the blue demon at the time. I just seen pictures of those, you know, Tibetan blue demons in China when I was there and whatever. And so I realized I had this woman is in my core. And so this like female, you know, demon deity thing, which is an incredible discovery to realize that you actually have this woman inside of you as part of you. And so the painting, especially the abstract painting, really changed. And when I was this is a very embarrassing undergrad story, which I'll share with you. When I was an undergrad, my senior show, there was a panel of like 7 New York artists. It was at Princeton. I did art history, but I also did, the closest you could get to doing studio art was to do a certificate in studio art with a major in art history. So I did that. And I went thinking I'd be a scientist, but freshman year I realized you could be an artist, and so I did that. And so I'm sitting there. There's like 7 scary New York artists. I'm like 21. I'm a senior or 22, and they're all wearing black. I'm wearing like plaid, and I'm wearing like all the wrong stuff. And I had this painting with 3 chimneys from the science building. There's just this big painting with like the rooftops and the chimneys. I don't have it here, but you can imagine. And one of them was like, "Did you ever consider that it's a very phallic painting?" Right? And I'm sitting there and I was like, just turned purple. Like I couldn't have been, like, it was the most mortifying thing to hear in front of these, like real authority figures. And so ever since then I've been hyper conscious whenever I make anything that has like a phallic or a vaginal symbol, which the fancy word is yonic symbol, I guess. I was excited because this painting was actually 2 in 1, and it was both a phallic and a yonic symbol, but not in a sexual way, but just it encapsulated this idea that you could have Mahankala inside you and be a dude at the same time. This is a painting called A Beep to Say Hi. It's painted behind Port Authority, and it goes along with that idea of painting the areas that you don't generally want to think about, but that are very much what sort of makes a city live. So a lot of it is thinking about infrastructure, what allows people to come in and out of the city, what allows the city to continue to live. It's such a complicated enterprise. And this little corner, this is where the buses line up. You can actually see that bus through some gating. This is where the buses line up to get into Port Authority, the commuter buses. This is a painting called Susanna Tammy, or Tammy Susanna, I can't remember which one's first. And it's the two names. The 2 names are in honor of my 2 favorite studio listening things. There's Susanna Rinaldi, who's a very famous tango singer. My family's from Argentina, and so I grew up here, but I go back sometimes, and my whole family's there except for my mom. So I have this very kind of odd relationship to Argentina and Argentine culture. Spanish is my first language. I grew up speaking it at home. Probably some of you guys speak other languages at home with your parents, and you have this weird relationship of being like an American, but you're also from this other place, and so it's this duality. And Tammy is Tammy Wynette, who is, of course, one of the best country singers of all time, who's my other studio favorite. And this, going back to college, this is a painting, I don't even know if it has a title that's worth mentioning, but this is a painting from about 1995, when I started painting outside. And I got into, the thing was, so I don't know how much you guys know. I feel like the East Coast and West Coast, I have no idea how distant we are, how foreign we are, and I have really no way of knowing. So I'll explain the context, which is that Princeton is in New Jersey. It's about an hour and a half from New York, and it's a school with very few serious art students, but they pay well, their faculty well, and so they can get good artists to come teach. So I had this really weird experience of going to art school with basically no serious classmates. There's 2 other serious people intending to be artists in the whole school, maybe 3 or 4. I'm being a little unfair. And we were getting these amazing lectures and these amazing artists from the city who would come down and teach. And I was really looking at Bonnard and Fairfield Porter and this whole tradition of plein air painting, because I grew up in DC and there were really great museums there that were free, so I would go to museums all the time as a teenager because I was a little bit, of a loner and I wanted to spend my time in museums. And all my friends were in punk rock bands, and I was kind of not musical at all, but I needed, but I was actually really into art, so I was the art guy associated with the punk rock group, and that seemed okay. That was okay. So I had this connection to art, so I was going out, and none of the teachers had the heart to tell me that you can't paint outside nowadays, that it's not done, that it's basically riding a horse and buggy. So I would go outside, and they would sort of encourage me. They're like, well, what's the harm? He's going to go off and get a regular job anyway. So I would go out and do this, and I got pretty serious about it, and I would paint at night. And so I would bring my stuff out and wait till all the lights went off, and midnight. I'd wait till and it was actually good because I could go to a show, go see a band play in college, and then go to my studio, get my stuff, and then go paint. And then come back, really late at 4 in the morning or something. So it was actually pretty great. And of course, painting at night, you have to set up your palette. I have a small flashlight. I would set up my palette to kind of know where stuff was. The black is here, and the phthalo green is here, and the white's there. And what ended up happening was that I was painting from observation, but they basically became abstract paintings from observation. And so I show this because this is like my undergrad work that was basically more or less what I've kind of been doing this back and forth ever since. This was a little bit later. This was the work I did before I went to after college. And okay, I'll tell you another quick story, and then to explain this, to give you a sense of what it meant. And this is something that I think when you're making art, especially in a big art center like LA or New York or London or something, the context of what people are allowed to do at that moment weighs heavily on how the work is understood, which I kind of knew but didn't know how to say back then. So when I got to, I showed those night paintings. When I realized that the best way to continue painting was to go to art school. I didn't know any other artists, so I said, I'll go to art school. And the cheapest way I could find to go to art school was to go to London and do one of these one-year MA programs they have. And they're kind of a scam, but the US educational system is such bigger a scam that they actually seem like a really good bargain in comparison. So I was like, oh, this is cheap. It's only like $10,000. So I went, I got some debt, and I sold a bunch of paintings out of my senior show to like my parents' friends. And I went to London, and when I was there, the first day of class was we would all show slides of our work. And back then it was like the slides with the projector, and I still see some projectors back there in the box with a physical slide. So I brought these 20 slides to London, and everybody there was like a trillion times cooler than me. Like they were like some Japanese guy who'd been living in Sweden for 6 years, and he made like styrofoam islands that he would float out in endangered this or that, or like making a video of like surgery because this guy was also a surgeon. It was just like crazy cool. Like, wow, this is. And I had these slides that I'd been making in New Jersey of like houses and roofs and trees and things. And so I literally, and I was also like, I realized, because I was like prematurely bald, I got into the program. Like, I think the guy just thought I was older than I was, and he thought I was like kind of, oh, like this guy's interesting. And they didn't really know how the U.S. system worked, and he was kind of excited to have an American. And so I think he thought I was like 10 years older than I was because I was bald, basically. And so I was like younger than everybody, and he liked that I was like out there painting like this wild man at night. So, because that's like what in English eyes, that's what Americans do. We're like kind of savage. So I go to London, and I'm literally, like because my name is sort of halfway down the alphabet, I'm like halfway on the list of who gets to show. And so like literally like the hour before, I'm just like paralyzed. I'm like, I'm going to show observational paintings of like trees and houses, and everybody here is like, welding a table where all the characters move when the audience walks in or whatever. And so I literally like just showed the slides. And I think halfway through talking about the slides, I actually just couldn't talk anymore without crying. And it was really sad. And it was so sad that this sort of 30-something English woman who was like a sensitive violin player and painter came up to me afterwards, and she's like, that wasn't that bad. And I was like, oh my God. So I think I did silently cry and I just ended up just hitting the button, and the projector was so loud that it was fine. But so after London, I really had to rethink my relationship to observational painting, because it was like so like I just got and it was the 90s, and people hated painting in the 90s, and you guys don't even, I don't know if that makes sense when I say that, but it was like if you were at like in art school or in an art-centric city, like a city with a big art scene, and you were painting in the late 90s, it was extremely bad to do that. Like you were just doing the wrong thing, right? It would be like if you just like, I don't know, something, I don't know an equivalent example, but it was bad. So I kind of had to rethink, and so it was like painting through that experience was very weird. And so when I left, I kind of took on a lot of, I started to understand painters who had a lot of conflicted relationship about painting as a medium. And in particular, a guy named Martin Kippenberger and Sigmar Polke and all these German guys from the 60s and 70s and 80s who had been kind of anti-painting painters. And so this was kind of like me trying to figure out what these German painters were doing with this very decorative, these were like single drips of paint that I would like very carefully mix the right consistency and like let drip down the whole canvas. And they were sort of purposely, like I let them be sloppy over here. And then on top of this very decorative kind of like pretty pattern, I painted with like really thick, basically like shit colors, this painting of Buenos Aires scene from an apartment building. That was like a photo I had that I'd taken from a distant relative's. When I went to visit a distant relative, I just like snapped a picture. So, but it's kind of an iconic part of Buenos Aires that's historically been the site of a lot of important historical protests and things like that. But it's kind of hidden, like you wouldn't know what it is if you're not from there, and even from there, it's kind of hard to read. So I went and then I went to grad school, and the first day of grad school was September 11th, 2001, which literally was the first day with our like, information session was like half an hour after the second plane had hit, and it was really weird. And the security guy, like all the people, like the deans would talk to us, and the security guy talked to me. He's like, you know, we're going to protect you from terrorism here in Rhode Island, and like it was just, like nobody knew what was going on. It was very strange. So my first year in my first semester in grad school, I was painting paintings like what I just showed you, but they just felt like at the end of it they felt really empty and they felt too constructed. And so I watched this movie called My Dinner with Andre. Some of you may have seen it. And it's just these two people talking about the nature of what it is to just be. And it's a theater director and a theater actor. It's Wallace Shawn, who's the guy from The Princess Bride, the Sicilian guy from The Princess Bride. Inconceivable, that guy. And Andre Gregory, who's a very, I guess, well-known theater director. It's filmed in the 70s, and it's really about a kind of Buddhist dialogue about what it is to be and what it is to, how can you experience being? Because once you experience being, you're not being, right? You're just experiencing, like, so it's this whole thing about, I guess the philosophical term would be like epistemology of like, how do you know what you know, right? How do you know that what you know isn't nonsense? And so I went to this very basic position of basically painting from observation. Like that was something I knew. And so I went back, and as Chris said, it was really unfashionable, but I didn't really know what I was doing. So I started by drawing in my kitchen. Like I couldn't deal with people, so I started, and then I started drawing friends I knew. This is a painter friend named Dan, who actually makes really great paintings. And at the time, he was really had a drug habit, and so he was just sitting there and doing drugs, and I'm not like a big drug person, but I was like painting him, and I was sort of painting his artwork was like his drug thoughts or something around him. But it was just from observation, and you can see the drop ceiling, because it was like the classic Rhode Island kind of renovation. The drop ceiling was this diagonal grid that seems to overlay my work again and again, like whether it's a fence or abstraction or whatever. So I'm going to speed up a little bit in the interest of time. And also now that I've given you a lot of stories, background. This was painted, and I slowly wanted to get like less cartoony and just better at plein air painting. And so I started painting and trying to like, somehow painting with making things look like they looked in real life meant that I didn't have to decide how they looked as much. I didn't have to choose. I could just try to recreate. And that seemed like sort of Buddhist in a way. And at the time I was like trying to figure out what it was. And I'm not like a Buddhist or anything, but like pretty much every I have like read like Buddhist books and have like what it is. But I did want to get myself paintings. But here's this painting of this Honda Civic, 86 Civic, that was like my car that I've been driving around for years and years, which is clearly a stand-in for me, but it's facing like, you know, backwards in the painting. And it's just this overgrown backyard in the rental I was living in Providence. As I got I also just got really into trying to figure out like how do you paint realistically in plein air with all the obstacles of changing light and changing conditions. So these are this painting and the one that follows are a pair of paintings that I did over about 3 months of the library at Brown University, which is up the hill from RISD. And so I would just go out every day between like 11 and 1 and paint, and then I had classes before or after. But I sort of scheduled my whole life around this like 2-hour window where I would paint in the same spot for 3 months and just go back and just keep working it. And so I like the idea that the painting is about that idea in My Dinner with Andre, that you're like, the painter, you're looking at the painting of a painter standing in front of a building that's reflecting the tree behind the painter, but the tree is actually also physically coming around the painter and coming between you and the reflection, and you're also seeing inside, past the glass, to the lights up there. So it's kind of like the way, all the layers, which seem to me like a perfect metaphor for how we experience reality. Like I'm experiencing this right here, I'm thinking about what's going to come next, I'm thinking about what's come before. And so it seemed all about the kind of layered experience that we have in our mind. When I finished school, I started painting faster because I had to. This was a painting of two. And I didn't paint from photos because I tried it for a while before RISD, and they never came out that good, and they were really dead. And I found that the only way to make good paintings was to paint from life. So it was kind of just a practical methodological decision to paint from life that I kept doing it. This is painted from a hotel window. My parents came to visit me in New York, and so I said, "Why don't you guys go be tourists, and I'll paint out your window," because they had this crazy view of like the backsides of big office buildings. And I liked how there was this 80s style, sort of like dated bronze and black, like smoked glass on the right, and a very like George W. Bush era, like lighter than air, Cartier box type building on the left. But that inside both, there's like these little lives. So the theme of reflections and glass and windows became very much a kind of metaphor for a kind of psychological state. Around the same time after grad school, I went, because I had a 3-month gap between which before I had to teach, I got a teaching position, but it started in 3 months, and I was really interested in going to China and understanding Chinese art because I'd been studying Buddhist cave paintings, and so I wanted to get to Dunhuang. So this is painted in western China in a mining town called Xining, which is actually where all the Tibetan monks are burning themselves these days, is around there. Anyway, the windows were a metaphor for that. I'm going to speed up and go a lot faster now. This was a painting when I got back to New York of two streets, really hot streets, and I wanted to figure out how can observational painting from a landscape express emotion. So these two streets are basically having sex, like hot day sex streets. And it's one of those things you sort of see and you're like, wow, that's really weird. Those two highways are like, and it's really beautiful but gritty at the same time. And this was a painting of what we actually see. I'm going to speed through and not talk about each image as much. But these are images of, and I'll just preface, this is a group of paintings I did of the place where I live, which basically almost everything in here is from IKEA, except for the books, because I don't think you can get books at IKEA. And I wanted to make them like express like the beauty of being in an apartment in nice light, but that you're in like an IKEA catalog, like you're living the IKEA catalog, and you're like, this is the most banal thing ever, but it's actually really beautiful, and I feel amazing right now, and I'm like in the IKEA catalog in my house or in my apartment, and literally everything except for the books and the tree in this painting and the clouds was manufactured by IKEA. So it's like you're living the IKEA dream. So a lot of the work became about sort of like these postcard images that are like super banal but also very real and beautiful at the same time, and being conscious simultaneously of like, and this must happen here all the time, where you're like, oh my God, I'm living in a postcard. Like I was just wandering around today, and it's amazing. You guys live in like the most beautiful place on earth, and you must feel it. Where you're like, this is like a postcard. I feel like I'm in a cliche, but I'm actually having this really powerful experience, and I can't, like how do you reconcile the reality of like you live in a TV show, and it's a real life, and it's a really conflicted thing. So, I mean, not you guys, all of us. That's just like the experience of contemporary life. And so it was like the more cliche the image, the better I felt, like the more confident I felt as a painter, the more like studio mojo, the more cliche an image I was willing to take on. So this was kind of like, the seascape is like the worst genre you can do as a contemporary artist. Like to go out and paint a sea is like the worst. And so I was trying to capture something contemporary with this little like mouth wave. And a lot of it was again about like experiencing, so what does the city actually look like So like seeing the fence. And this was after several 5 years of sort of like only painting observationally, this was the kind of first painting where I started painting abstractly. It's actually a painting of airplanes in a hangar. There's a hangar of abandoned airplanes in New York at the first New York airport that you can just drive up to. It's a national park. And it's really run down, and you can just like, I just set up shop and painted up on an observation deck, and like nobody minded. And the fumes were, I felt sick all of a sudden, so I stopped painting halfway. And when I got back to the studio, I realized I'd made like a good abstract painting. And so I started using the paints I had left over from my landscape painting to make abstract paintings and to allow myself techniques that, so you can see a back and forth between the two styles. And I would allow myself almost like a carnival style. I would make these kind of button-down paintings about, like surveillance and, construct like this idea of glamour. Like, here's this really crappy space, but in very expensive area. So what do we do to make this real estate valuable? Let's put like lights and make it look like it's like a Broadway entrance for like sad office workers walking through this dead space. There's a lot of it's about sort of the theatrics, and then this plant inside is like looking down at these like poor like bomb protection plants here that are like just window dressing for bomb protection. And he's like, who of us has it worse? Like you guys are like outside and homeless, and I'm like stuck in the fancy office, but I have air conditioning. It's like this weird plant stand-in for people. This is called Yellow Tape. It was like building a park. And again, a lot of these are about, like this is a painting, I can't remember the title, but it's really about when you walk in a bridge and there's a suicide fence, and you realize like, oh, this is like a weird architectural reminder of like the constant violence that we do to others. Like people who throw frozen turkeys off or themselves off. We build these fences, and so we're surrounded by this like constant architectural reminder of violence and sad stuff. And I wanted that sort of like, this is a little Mexican like tapestry, Mexican rug painting, but I wanted to also, like I would make these sad paintings, and in the studio I was like kind of making these things that would play with like really sort of bad painterly taste and almost like a carnival atmosphere. I wanted to try, like I was like, what's the most embarrassing thing I can do? I was like, let me make a huge painting. This is like pretty big. It's like maybe 7 feet tall and 6.5 feet wide. I want to make a painting that's just about joy. Like I make all these sad paintings. Like a joyful painting. I think I'd been painting at the beach and I was feeling really good, and I thought, let me just make a painting of joy. And so I've got this huge 1-foot brush and just made this big painting. And this was, this was a hammock in Rhode Island. These are those dead Christmas trees. Do you have dead Christmas trees that like there's like 2 weeks where there's just like these corpses of like the holiday all over? So this was, and it's just this amazing thing where like the city is littered with like dead Christmas trees, and it's just like beautiful and poignant and sad at the same time. And this was a painting that I wanted to do everything, the tools and the motif, like everything about this painting. I wanted to do stuff that could have been done 100 years ago. But make it feel somehow about today. And so I went out to Prospect Park with my paints, and it's pretty small, and have it be like a painting that if you knew painting, you'd be like, wow, that's clearly from the 2000s, but nothing about it would indicate that externally. And so that was kind of like a challenge I often sort of try to set for myself. And this is a painting, this and the next, you can see the back and forth between like the woods and the, I did a series of night. I'm going to speed up a little bit and just give a few so we can have some questions. This is a series of night paintings. There's a painting called Columns, and this was the first painting where I really got into the space between the two stripes being the thing in the painting, and not knowing which is the subject, the figure, and which is the ground, which is the subject, and what's like the sort of object. And that became kind of, for me, about relationships. Like, not knowing who is the figure and who's the ground. Like I think this conversation is about me, but it might actually be about the you in this conversation. Or when you're talking to somebody, it's like that we're always thinking we're the figure, but actually we could be the ground to somebody else. This is a parking lot in Chelsea, which is the center of the world's art market. And so I was like kind of in this idea of self-mortification. I wanted to paint outside in plein air in Chelsea. But I was like, this is like going to be the most mortifying thing I can imagine. And so it's actually like a block from David Zwirner, which is like one of the 3 mega galleries in the world. But I loved this stacked parking lot that they had of like cars stacked up, which you get a lot in New York. And so I went to a party, and then I had my paints in the car, and I went and drove there at like 2 in the morning on a Saturday night when nobody would be around, and like secretly painted Chelsea. Just as like, I don't know, it was like a weird adolescent prank, but just to say like I did it. But it ended up being a painting I really liked. And I like that you can totally see that this is like a Ford, at least I can totally see it's a Ford, like a white Ford SUV, Explorer or something. So I'll show you, I'm going to speed through so we have a few questions. But you can see how the issue of positive and negative space, these are some drawings I've been doing as well, that I'll be doing a show in Goleta on Friday, that some of these might be in that. This is a big drawing. It's actually about 7 feet tall and 3 feet wide. Colored pencil. This is a small drawing. There's another colored pencil drawing. So in drawings, I was finding that I was erasing. Like this drawing was like drawn and erased, and I found that I was erasing as much as I was, or just like 51% drawing and 49% erasing. And so I wanted to bring that into the painting. And so I'll end with this image because we're kind of at time. And this is from last year, where you don't really know if it's the colored parts that are the thing you're looking at or the white parts. And I really like that it's actually both. Like you go back and forth, and it doesn't. I've been interested in sort of making a painting where it doesn't settle down into one. And it's kind of an old push-pull thing from the 50s, but I think it's actually extremely relevant to the way that we don't quite know where things are right now. Like we don't really know where in the world we're supposed to be looking. It used to be you had like 3 networks and that was it, and you knew what your news was. And now like we have no idea. Should I be looking at the internet? Should I be reading like the New York Times? Should I be like experiencing the world just without media? So I like that ambiguity as a sort of experience that I experienced today. This painting is called Bop because the upper right white part looks like a bunny, and my daughter's transitional object, the thing like her little special toy, is a little bunny that subconsciously just appeared on this painting, and then I didn't realize till 2 days later, and I was like, oh my god, I painted my daughter's like special toy that I never want her to lose. So I will end with her bunny, and if there's any questions, please fire away. And I know we have like 5 or 10 minutes. So.
I see a connection between this painting and like the kind of like suicide, so like the turkey blocker.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering like the decision, like the observational process for you, and sort of like finding a moment, like whether it's like the corner of the bookshelf behind the shiitake mug or something. When you see something and it seems like resolutely this is an abstract idea, I guess maybe it would be more suitable for an abstract painting, or this is maybe more suitable for a more persuasively representational painting or something. Does that happen often, like more in the observational process, or is that something you take into the studio and find during the process of the painting?
Well, the abstractions, I should say, are all done in the studio without really like observing anything. And the observational paintings are really one shot. I mean, I should have mentioned this earlier. They're all like one shot. I just set up, I do it, and it either works or it doesn't. If it doesn't work, I just wipe it away and come back another day and do it from the beginning again. I would say with it's different for each group of work. With observational paintings, what often happens is I'll see a scene and I know it's right, but I don't yet know why. And it usually takes about anywhere from 3 to 5 or 6 hours to paint those things. And so somewhere about the midway mark, after I've laid in the big shapes, I kind of realize, like, oh, here's like 5 to 15 things I really need to nail, and it'll make sense. Like if you look at the shiitake painting, there's a napkin on the left, but you can't really even tell what it is. Like it could be a stack of newspaper, it could be a napkin, but it didn't matter that it wasn't that specific, because that's the way we experience the world. Like, I know you have a beard, but I don't know if you're wearing jeans. Do you know what I mean? Like I experienced part of it, but I could figure it out if I really looked. And so it's like I don't have to always take in everything. But with the abstractions, it's very much like I'm working in a kind of, not a daze, but I'm just kind of, I very much just let things happen on the canvas. And they're done often usually when they surprise me. And it's really, it's really weird, and it is, I know this is like, I'm in California, and I would use this metaphor even if I wasn't here, but it is a lot like surfing. Like, you don't know which wave is going to work. And I've surfed like once and managed to stand up, for like a second, so it's not like I really know what I'm talking about. But I've seen enough movies to know how it works. But with the abstraction, it's really like, I'm doing stuff, and I'm kind of like waiting for the painting to like surprise me and be like, it's a little, I have a 3-year-old, and so all of a sudden she'll be like, the food goes in your mouth and down the asparagus, she calls the esophagus the asparagus, and down the asparagus and into your belly and then into the tiny intestine. And I'm like, holy crap, how do you know that? Like, she just surprised me. I was like, how do you know about the little, like, she calls it the tiny intestine, but how do you know, like, and so it's kind of like when the paintings do that to me, like where they're just like, oh, here's this thing that, and a lot of times like I'll go to the bathroom and then come back and just out of the corner of my eye I'll be like, oh my God, I didn't even know you were here. Like, I didn't even know you looked like this. Like, it's this weird thing. It's like when you see, if you ever have somebody you're with all the time, like a parent or a spouse, somebody you see every day and you can't see them anymore. This happens with parents. Like, you can't see you don't know what they look like, right? You know what they look like, but you can't, what, I look like, but you don't know what your parent looks like. And then you see them and you don't realize it's them for a second, and you see them as you would as a stranger, and it's really disconcerting. And you're like, oh my God, it's like my dad's this old guy. And so that's the experience of kind of the uncanny. There's my dad, oh my God. And he's like younger than me. Okay, yes?
Please stop talking about your divorce.
Okay. I thought you were actually saying that to me, and I was like, that was like 2 years ago. We're fine now. We did therapy. It's awesome. Yeah.
It's difficult for me to ask in English, so sorry.
Take your time.
But when you do paintings like this, you use a lot of bright and beautiful colors, and they are really in harmony for me. So my question is, when you start to paint, do you prepare your palette with all colors, or you just grab which one? That's a very smart question. It's funny, when I started the abstractions, what I would do, the reason I started them was actually, I think I started them for many reasons, but the reason I allowed myself to start them was because I had to teach a color class, and I'd never taught that, and I never took a color class, so I had to teach something that I hadn't taken. So I knew how to use color, but I didn't know like the vocabulary. And so I started reading about color and whatever, and I thought I should really know how to use like colors in the traditional, like in the right way. So I got the color aids, which are these cards that each one has a color, and you can get like hundreds of them. And I started playing with them, and I would actually do that. I would choose a palette. There was an exercise I really liked that Joseph Albers, this great German painter, color theorist, had, where you have to choose a palette that you hate, and you have to make a good painting out of it. And it's actually a great exercise. And so I would choose, like, what's the worst palette I could choose? And so I do that now. So for years I would use color aid and like sit there for hours and play with them and find like, oh my God, that's the worst I could, and it becomes really fun. It's much more fun than finding a good one. And then how do you make a good painting out of that? And that's where that's where it gets into the sort of what you were asking about, like the kind of, you're just really like, it's like you have 5 people who hate each other and you have to make them in a room, and you have to make, like, you go to a party and you're like, this is the worst group of people at a party ever, and we're going to make this work or not, right? Like, what am I going to do? I'm going to get you drunk, or I'm going to say this amazing story or something. I'm going to slip on a banana peel, you're going to laugh, we're all going to be unified through that, right? So it's like, how do you make these colors work together? So it's not that I use harmonious colors, it's that I kind of make these 5 weird people in a room. The paintings are really like my way of figuring out how they can work together. Because it looks like you just came to your studio and, okay, you.
Well, a lot of it is that, and a lot of it's kind of like choosing like first choice, worst choice, and then let me work with that,
And then last question. Can you tell us how you prepare, what do you have when you go to paint outside?
If it's cold, I have a lot of clothes, lots of layers of clothes. What do you mean, like paint, like colors?
What do you have in your suitcase for painting?
I have a French easel, like a field easel, like the Impressionists, and I carry it either on a backpack or a rolly suitcase, depending on where I'm going. If I have to walk through the woods, I'll take the backpack. If it's in the city, I'll take the suitcase. I carry, I mean, I look kind of like homeless, like I have really dirty clothes, and I use lots of rags. I bring tons and tons of rags, cotton rags, and I usually use about 15 colors. I usually use about anywhere from, I would say on average, 12 to 18 brushes per session. I mean, I don't like wear them out. I just like use them and then, go back to my studio and clean them. Everybody's like, oh my God. And then I feel like spending hundreds of dollars every day. But I use really good brushes. I use sable brushes, and I do use like really expensive sable brushes to get the touch, which I don't really use as much in my studio paintings. But for the speed and the accuracy I need in the observational paintings, I found that I have to use Kolinsky sable, Russian Kolinsky. I mean, they're made in Germany, but the only place where Kolinsky sables grow is in Russia, in Siberia. So I use, which I suspect. Anyway, whatever. So yeah. Whatever. You may be Russian, so I don't know. Yeah. Okay.
I just started dabbling sketching and oil pastels on canvas. I'm not going to say I'm an artist because I don't know, but what is your advice for someone who's just starting out? Like, I'm finding like a hard time to get inspiration. Like, I want to do all this stuff, but like I can't fine tune like what I'm gonna depict on the canvas.
Wow. I mean, I don't want to sound. I don't know how to answer. I mean, that's a really good question. I don't know how to answer it, and I don't want to sound like a jerk. I think it goes beyond being a jerk into being like a dick. Actually, I don't want to sound like a dick. But because I mean, what I'm going to tell you is actually honest, which is that like. Honestly, you have to just study with people. I mean, you have like really good faculty here. And so a lot of it is just studying. The artists I know who are professional artists who work at it, who make their living doing it, paint a lot. It takes 10 years to get pretty good, like good enough that you can be considered like a professional level in terms of just skill. So, and it's like 10 years of basically painting about 3 to 4 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week. So the people I know in New York who are working artists, it's not like they're not rich and famous, whatever, but they're just like making a living being artists through a mix of showing and teaching and whatever, this and that. It takes about 10 years of painting 5 or 6. It's like being a concert violinist. Like you just got to do it a lot, and in 10 years you'll be at a level where you can choose whether you want to, whether this is something you want to pursue or not. And a lot of people get to that point and realize they're not that into it anymore, and a lot of people keep doing it. So. Really, that's all there is to it. You just do it for a long time, and 10 years later, if you do it a lot, you'll be good enough that people will be interested in your work. So, I mean, I would say my advice would be if you're wondering about it, my advice would be find like-minded people who are also at your level, and just give yourselves assignments and make it like a group thing, and that helps. I mean, if you're like having trouble getting inspired, it's a lot easier when you have like a fixed date, like. Every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday at 6, we're going to meet and we're going to just draw for 3 hours, and we're going to set up the worst still life. Each person gets, honestly, set up the worst still life you can to piss everybody else off, and we're going to draw that and make it into a landscape that's like a nightmare, and like you create your own. I mean, and then also you just study. I mean, you're studying at a place with great faculty, and so honestly, pretty much 99 of the 100 good artists I know studied with good people. So you take advantage of your professors. Yeah, I think probably, I don't know, do we have time for one more maybe?
Yeah, we can do one more if it's like really a great question.
Or even if it's like...
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you guys.